Back in 2015, Kyle Mills, a caver from West Virginia, offered his aid to a group of 5 cavers from Baltimore, Maryland. The group left the city lights behind to explore the countryside and uncover the mystery and beauty of one of the longest caves in the U.S., a cave only accessible from an entrance dug by human hands roughly 50 years ago, a place known as Scott Hollow Cave. With over 30 miles of underground passages to explore and almost 0 dangerous sections, Scott Hollow is a marathon, not a sprint. But their journey turned into a race against time when one of the cavers suffered a horrible accident. Did the whole team make it out alive? Or did they find death in the icy river that winds through Scott Hollow Cave? The 5 Maryland cavers were intrigued by Scott Hollow's unique entrance and vast interior filled with speleothems, chewed up by the eternal waters coursing through its chambers. They felt safe as they approached the entrance, located just off a road with a paved sidewalk and well-kept lawn. While the cave below was wild, its main entrance was sheltered from the dangers of flooding rain with a structure you would only expect to find at a show cave. The group wouldn't have to camp in the wilderness and worry about fending off bears or other deadly creatures. Adding to the group's sense of safety, their guide, Kyle Mills, was also a trained wilderness first responder, or WFR. They parked their car among the fall leaves that had already turned the same rusted hues as the cold rock below ground, and they stepped into the cool open air to find a fully constructed house. The abode was built into a hill, supported by a strong cement foundation and bordered by a wooden porch that wrapped around front. This impressive structure was created to protect the entrance to Scott Hollow, and it gave traveling splunkers some much-needed shelter and storage space as they prepared for what could be an overnight stay in the pitch-black void crawling beneath the floorboards. Inside, the cavers were greeted to wood floors and stairs leading to the home's multiple stories. Now, instead of tackling the entirety of this massive cave, for this trip, the cavers only planned to be underground for around 4 hours, completing a short route through the cave's spectacular double waterfall chamber. The group changed into their full caving attire: sturdy helmets, rugged overalls, sealed boots, and packs loaded with gear in case of emergency. Then, they grouped near the door to find the home's main attraction, an eerily bare room with a small wooden lid on the floor that revealed a hole to the abyss. The entrance to Scott Hollow was reinforced with a corrugated metal tube to protect the man-made tunnel from breaking apart, sending rocks down onto the heads of cavers, or collapsing entirely, sealing them in a dark tomb. The owner of the home, Mike Dorr, is also a caver, and he occasionally gives paid tours of the wild cave to adventurers. However, only National Speleological Society members who have been in the organization for over a year are allowed to enter. As recently as 1995, this house didn't even exist. Instead, the same metal tube was exposed, standing around 4 feet off the ground and marked by a wood fence and a couple wood retaining walls that kept dirt from collapsing over exposed rock, which could damage or destroy the only entryway to the massive cave below. Members of the Scott family named the cave when it was first discovered, and descendants claim that a second entrance can be found on a family farm. But even today, cavers can only enter through the locked doors of this West Virginian cabin in the woods. One by one, the group descended into the hole below the house. Metal rungs gave the cavers a simple pathway down. They don't need complex rope systems to delve deeper into the sinkhole. Despite all the effort put into developing the cave's entrance, the metal tube still looked suspicious, with rusted rivets and its bent rungs that look hastily welded without extra support or securing via screws or other fasteners. If any of the handles broke, the cavers would be dead before they ever saw the interior of Scott Hollow. Fortunately, they all climbed down the 30-foot tube without trouble and found themselves in a chamber with a glistening triangular ceiling that quickly transitioned into a boulder passage dubbed Mastodon Avenue. Wind swept through the tunnel as the cavers walked forward. Scott Hollow then curved into a long, steep decline with a section known as Paddy Lane. The cave itself has a max depth just short of 600 feet. But instead of gradually descending into the earth, the first portion of the cave steeply dove nearly 400 feet down as the cavers stepped and crawled down mounds of rubble until they reached the junction room. They marveled at the twisted shapes of the smooth stone that pressed around them on all sides as they ventured onward to find the stream responsible for Scott Hollow. This underground waterway is the Mystic River. It flows across 6.5 miles of the cave's total length, although over a mile of the river is only accessible via cave diving, and it runs northward instead of southward like most above-ground streams. The walls of the Mystic River passage can stretch up to 100 feet high, so flash floods could drown or freeze cavers, leaving them no chance of finding high ground in some sections. So far, the water level was low, which allowed Mills and his band of 5 cavers to make short work of Mystic River. But these early portions of the cave can be deceptive. What starts as only a few inches of water can later sink into deeper currents with icy temperatures that could turn the gentle walkway into a battle for survival. After a couple more bends along the river, the group met the first of Scott Hollow's many iconic formations, the double waterfall. At around 4 feet tall, one strong current cut through the rock in the distance, while tiny curtains of water trickled across the foreground, joining to form a seafoam green pool beneath the rocky ledges. Beyond the 2 waterfalls, some sections of the cave have thin metal bars fixed onto the rock to give cavers the slimmest of footholds as they traverse dangerous descents, many times without harnesses. These fixtures don't trivialize dangerous traverse sections, but they can make the cave easier. The cavers pushed onward. Eastern sections of the cave have bedding plains, or regions where new passages are forming, while the west is steep and complex. Deeper within, they were looking forward to seeing the large hall-like passage known as Iron City, which leads to the Kansas Room, with a pile of rubble towering over 5 times the height of a person. Upstream, past a structure called John's Flowstone, Mystic River formed a sump, which tasked cavers to perform the most dangerous cave maneuver, diving into pitch-black depths far below ground. However, this team wasn't prepared to take the plunge, so instead, they were supposed to go to Amber's Garden with its tall curtains and stalactites as they journeyed into a room with soda straw formations that hung from the ceiling like melting wax. Then, they could take a break in the chess room to enjoy the atmosphere. And if they felt adventurous, they could dig deep and venture to the camp area, where expeditions make use of natural divots in the rock, placing collapsible metal stoves and other equipment as overnight groups set up their sleeping bags. However, this group never made it to the iconic Glacier Room or many of the cave's other features. They would only see a fraction of Scott Hollow's renowned formations as their time underground was cut short. An hour into the trip, or roughly 4,000 feet into Scott Hollow Cave, one of the cavers from Maryland was climbing down a section where the ceiling and walls had crumbled years ago, forming a thick layer of boulders on the ground. At 250 pounds, this 18-year-old man was likely tall and muscular. He could have tossed any of the boulders out of his way, a feat many cavers couldn't dream of. But his heavy build also had some drawbacks. Caving is naturally suited for smaller builds, with many sporting caves tasking individuals to squeeze through narrow passages and tight crawls. Plus, larger frames use more energy, and their higher relative weight can make climbing sections even harder. They may be able to lift more, but their proportional body mass makes it harder to perform the same climbing maneuvers over the same amount of time. These drawbacks don't prohibit people with larger builds from entering caves. Caving can be for people of all shapes and sizes. But old sayings can sometimes be true. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. The group reached the end of a breakdown, and had to climb the remainder of the ledge to reach the floor. Kyle explained the proper procedure, showed them where to place their hands and feet, and the party made quick work of the short descent. After all, they were NSS-licensed cavers. Then the 18-year-old man was next. He began to climb down, but the rock was more slippery than he had expected. The treads of his boots were caked in mud, leaving them ineffective at gripping the stone. His fingers tightened as he tried to avoid slipping, but he could feel his grip loosening as his hands struggled to anchor his weight. His muscle memory made him automatically sit back as if he was in a harness. But he had no harness. As his body moved further from the wall, his center of mass changed, and his confident descent broke as he fell from the ledge. The drop was only 10 feet, a distance that could form a safe landing if he was trying to make the jump. He might have been perfectly fine if he landed flat on his feet, but he was caught off guard by his fall and he landed awkwardly, and it was clear to everyone he was not okay. The man wailed as he laid on the cold stone floor of Scott Hollow, and the cave guide's rescue training immediately took over as he rushed to the fallen caver, his gear heaving with each heavy stride as his urgent steps banged on the rock below. Kyle found the caver could move, so he wasn't at risk of shock for now. He could breathe, he was conscious, and he made Kyle's job easier by immediately grasping for his leg, which loosely flopped at a right angle just past where his hands gripped his overalls. After a closer assessment, Kyle found that the man had broken his tibia and fibula, both of the bones that make up the shin region of his lower leg. His life may not be in danger yet, but the gruesome injury made his friends nearly vomit up their granola bars as they turned away from the shocking sight. Kyle gave the man some first aid, splinted his leg as best he could, and moved him to a better position. During the process, the splintered ends of the man's bones rubbed together, sending surges of pain that choked him and left him dizzy. Kyle rallied two of the other cavers who were still strong after the ordeal and sent them to get help. The first ledge was the hardest. They just saw what the unforgiving stone had done to their friend, and now they had to go up the hard way. Their hearts pounded as they climbed the side of the cliff, but they made it up and over the rest of the rubble, being careful not to send boulders crashing down below. Their movement was hampered by the frigid chill of Mystic River that fought against them as they balanced on the slippery pebbles of the riverbed. Panting and desperately going as fast as they could, the two cavers made it to the surface and called 911 at around 4:30 p.m. Dispatch then contacted multiple rescue teams, including the Blacksburg Cave Rescue Group and the VPI Cave Club. Emergency personnel even called some locals who volunteered their services for these sorts of disasters. The Blacksburg squad came a long way since they had first begun operations in 1950, performing their rescues out of an old Chevy truck. Now, they have a custom transport and over 200 members split between different specialties, including a rescue task force to save patients from hostile environments where the enemy isn't the elements, but other people. Thankfully, the various teams quickly rallied and made it to Scott Hollow in just under 2 hours after they were first contacted. Inside the twisting catacombs of the cave, the man was enduring his pain for now, but his immobile positioning and the chilling air were making him colder by the second. The first team entered the round metal tube at the mouth of the cave, bringing with them a Stokes litter to get the man prepped for extraction. Local legend Tony Smith was designated the role of underground coordinator to delegate work and lead the operation. The first group reached the man in record time. They were all familiar with the cave, and Kyle had left the two Maryland cavers with prime instructions on where to find them. The two cavers were shaken, but they accurately conveyed those details to the rescue squads, so the teams had no trouble finding them. Knowing exactly where the cavers were made the whole process much more streamlined, since they didn't need to plan a sweeping search of the cave's vast interior. Meanwhile, more rescuers made their way to the house that concealed the entrance to Scott Hollow. An hour and a half after the first group entered the cave, a second group climbed down the shoddy rungs of rebar. The first group's paramedic gave the man some gentle painkillers, completed a better splint, and got him secured in the basket to prevent any unnecessary movements that could make his injuries worse. The second group was tasked with bringing wire into the cave to connect field phones from the surface to the deep tunnels of the cave. Their work was slower and more methodical since they had to avoid getting tangled or caught on any sharp rocks which could slice through the wire, silencing communications and forcing a long process of mending or replacing the wire. Around 5 hours after he fell, rescuers were fully prepped and began the transport mission. Ropes were rigged to help the man up the steeper sections, including the spot where he fell. Now, normally, this man would be the one lifting people in a time of need, but when he needed help in this situation, extra rescuers had to come to the side of his basket. The crews needed more people to help carry the heavy and unwieldy basket. The rescuers called for backup to hoist the rope and to hold the litter, since the patient was bigger than the lightweight cavers they were used to carrying. One wrong move could send him crashing to the floor below, landing spine first onto boulders and even stalagmites. Then he'd be facing a whole world of new troubles. The ropes and pulleys used to get him through difficult sections heaved and squeaked, and the cavers quickly whipped their headlamps toward the ceiling to watch the bolts of anchor struggling with the load. The cavers were reminded to always replace any outdated hardware, and a few tense moments of the rescue reminded the teams that they could always overdo safety features like anchors, but while a weak link could hold smaller cavers, any shoddy equipment or rush drops could easily kill someone else. It's always better to overdo it rather than winging safety features when you're hundreds of feet below ground in the cold darkness of a cave. At the height of the rescue, 51 people were inside the cave to help bring the patient to safety. The steep decline near the entrance was difficult. They needed even more extra people below the litter to support as they slowly heaved him back up the mounds of rubble. After a long and dicey trip, they were finally below the metal hole, with the home's LED light shining down on him like salvation. But they had some final hurdles to overcome. The tube itself struggled to fit the wide basket, and going vertically meant more pressure could be placed on his broken leg, so they had to reinforce the straps. To get the man up the culvert, local rescuer Carl Amundsen took over in place of Tony, since he had more experience with this unique situation. The injured caver was placed with his back against the uneven metal bars that formed the ladder of the tunnel, but they still pressed against the hard plastic and pinched his back. The whole ascent was uncomfortable, but he breathed deeply, and after what felt like an eternity, his head finally rose up into the room above to meet Tony and the other rescuers who were waiting topside. The whole return trip took 4 more hours to get him to the surface, which brought the rescue to a total of 9 hours long. Many of the rescuers were frequent caving partners. Their sense of community and friendship enabled them to work together as a team much more efficiently than the average rescue operation. And Kyle's training also sped up the process. Their collective efforts became the key that got the patient out safely. The dark veil of night lingered in the sky above as the man was finally brought out of the cave. All of the other cavers and rescuers exited just 45 minutes after they saved him, completing a speedy wrap-up to the Scott Hollow cave rescue. The injured man was transported to the hospital and released just 3 days later, despite his intense injury. He probably had to skip leg day at the gym for a while, but at least he could live to tell the tale of his near-death experience deep underground. Do you think the man returned to caving after his horrific leg injury? Would you dare to climb down into the shadows knowing the dangers that lurk within? Let us know in the comments section. By the way, you don't have to rappel down any cliffs to hit that like button, so make sure that you give it a click and make sure that you subscribe to the channel for more intense cave rescue stories.